Simplify the mix by nailing this key step early in your production process. This applies to people who work 100% with samples and also to people who record everything from scratch. You might be new to mixing, or maybe you're starting to get the hang of your DAW, you know how to use EQ, you're getting a handle on compression, but your mixes still sound mediocre. Part of the problem might be that you are simply neglecting one step. I find when I spend more time at the beginning of the production process, every step after is easier and I can achieve better results. I want to give you a quick example of my situation when I started mixing and explain why my productions were garbage. I'd walk into a session, I'd set up some microphones, I'd record a song really quick, and then I'd jump into the mixing phase. And right away, I'd be finding things that were problematic. I'd be solving problems and fixing things. But why am I solving problems? Why am I fixing things? I've missed a step here. So here's my solution to simplifying your mix. You ready? You need to nail the arrangement. Maybe you've heard this word before, but do you understand what it means exactly? Do you have a process for arranging a song? In the early stages of a production, I like to think of the arrangement as somewhat of a blueprint. It's kind of how things in the song are going to work together. The arrangement will often change throughout the production process as we tweak it and enhance it to make things better. Having a solid game plan to start with and an idea of where we're going is going to make this whole process so much easier, and it's going to make our mixing in the end a breeze. There's a lot of things to consider when arranging a song and a lot of things to listen for, and I don't want to overwhelm you. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to take you to a venue right now, and we're going to go look at a stage, and I'm going to explain how I think about arrangement.
Here we are at the venue. Woo! Everyone's having a good time. Martha looks wasted. All right, here we are at the venue. Here's the stage. We have some great sound in here, really good spot. This is where we're going to visualize the song and build our arrangement. Before we start, there's a few things we need to know. We need to know what instruments are involved and what they sound like, and this can be determined by the genre of the song. Hopefully we have a genre in mind when we're building our arrangement. Something else that's really helpful here is a reference song, something I can look at or listen to and kind of see how it sounds, see how the instruments play in that song, see how everything's working together. And this kind of goes hand in hand with genre. Something else I like to know before I arrange a song is the message of the song or the mood we're trying to portray in that song. Maybe there's part of the song where the message is prevalent. Maybe it's like the hook, the chorus, or maybe it's like the bridge where it breaks down and gets super emotional and we really feel what the song is about. Well, I want to present this in the most connective and kind of emotional way possible. So I want to start building the dynamic in the arrangement so that I can build up to this part and really let it shine. Okay, now that we have some information to work with, we can start to visualize our song, start to finish, up on our beautiful stage here. This stage is three-dimensional. We have height from top to bottom, we have width from side to side, and we have depth from the front to the back. The way I want to visualize this is imagining where all of the players are standing on the stage and how tall they are, how wide they are, how far back they are. So we're going to start with the width. In mixing, we can pan things anywhere from left, center, to right, and everywhere in between. But when we're thinking about width, the sounds don't magically just sound wide. We need to record these sounds or choose samples with intent. So how do we actually make things sound wide? Well, we use contrast. Creating contrast between the left and right channels gives us a sense of space. Here's an example on creating contrast to give you a wider sound. Say there's a guitar track in a song. One way to make this sound wider, you could record your initial guitar track and then you could record a separate guitar track up one octave, or maybe you could try playing it just further up the neck, or maybe playing the same chords in a different position, just something different. Or maybe you have another guitar that sounds quite different and you can just play it on that guitar as well. And then when you get to the mixing phase, you can pan one guitar to one side and the other guitar to the other side. Now we have contrast between these two guitars, and it's likely going to increase the width of your mix. Here's another way to achieve some width with your guitar. So I've got my guitar track I'm recording, and I don't want it right in the middle competing with whatever else is there, for instance, the vocal. So I'm gonna put up another microphone in the recording process and capture the sound of the room itself, the natural room reverb. Maybe this is in a part of the room that I'm recording in, or maybe it's like one room over to capture a slightly different sound. And then when I get to the mix phase, I'm gonna pan that guitar to one side and the room reverb to another side. And it's gonna give me this big stereo image, and then I'm gonna have space right down the center for that vocal to sit. Here's another example. Say we're recording an instrument, try using 2 microphones instead of 1 and build that stereo field naturally rather than trying to do it with effects later on. If I know this guitar needs to sound wide in my mix later on, I'm not just gonna record it with 1 microphone and capture this mono source. Like I want it to sound bigger, I want it to sound wider. So put up that second mic, try experimenting with placements, XY patterns, wider miking, whatever you want, and spread that acoustic guitar out. Here's something else to consider, LCR Panning. This stands for left, center, right panning. And the idea is that everything in your mix is going to be panned either left, center, or right. And if you try to imagine this on a stage, we've got our kick, our bass, our lead vocal all in the center. We've got a guitar happening on the left here, and then another one over here on the right. We've got some backup vocals or harmony or whatever. Maybe we've got some horns in this song and they're somewhere over here. And maybe there's some more drums and percussion happening back here. And we've got some other strings on this side. Just looking at this now, it is absolutely cluttered. We can't really hear the guitar here because there's vocals in the way. And then we've got our strings back here, and they're all just stacked on top of each other. Same for the center channel and the right channel. This idea of LCR mixing works really well when we don't have a ton of instruments playing at the same time. But when we have really dense songs, dense mixes with lots of things happening, and we just stack everything on top of these 3 panning positions, it gets really muffled. It starts to get muddy in those spots. And I personally would like to utilize those other spaces in between the left and the right channels and give my song a big full width rather than stacking things only on top of each other. Next, we're gonna look at the depth of our mix, and that is from the front to the back. Sounds up front can be described as present, and as they move to the back, they become darker and sound more distant. So how do we achieve depth in our song? We need to create contrast between the front and the back. I know we all want to hear our beautifully recorded instruments and sounds or our lovely samples, but if everything is just right up front, there's going to be no contrast, it's going to sound busy, and it's going to be overwhelming. Don't get me wrong, this can work at certain points in your song, like a really intense part, and if everything is right up front, it might help create that really intense sound, but generally things don't stay right up front the entire song. Turning down the volume is a really simple way to make something sound smaller and more distant. Something else that gives us depth in our mix is frequency. Generally, something with lots of treble and high end is going to give us a sound right up front and very present, and darker sounds are going to sound more distant and further away. How can we achieve a darker sound before the mixing phase? Well, we could choose a darker instrument. For instance, that guitar track we recorded, maybe we just use a guitar with old strings on it and they don't sound so bright because they're worn out and they have this darker sound to them. Or maybe we play with the settings on our amp and just turn down that treble. We could also pick a different microphone that just naturally sounds darker. Something else we can do to push our sounds further back in a mix is considering the room reverb that we're capturing in the recording. Maybe we choose a different room that just naturally sounds darker. Or maybe instead of miking our instrument right up close, we move the microphone further away to capture more of the room sound, rather than the direct sound of the instrument. If we record in, say, a treated studio, we're probably gonna have pretty clean sounds, not a lot of reverberation, and the instrument's gonna sound up front. Whereas if we record in a big reverberant space, we're gonna hear much more of the room itself, especially if we move that microphone away from the instrument. Here's another example on creating depth in your mix. Let's think back to before when we were creating width and we recorded that guitar track and we had another microphone up to capture the room reverb and we pan those to either side. When we get to our mixing phase, we pan these sounds both to the same side and then we start to adjust the levels. We can start turning our guitar track down while the room reverb track comes up, and then these sound blend together and become more distant. The more room reverb you turn up and guitar you turn down, the more distant it's gonna sound. Here's a tip for the sample-based producers. You guys using samples, you have to choose your samples, right? So I think you should have like subfolders in your sample library, like bright sounds and dark sounds. Just something to consider. Maybe it'll speed up your workflow. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. I think you should try it. The last dimension we're gonna talk about is the height from the floor to the ceiling. I like to think about the height in terms of frequency. For instance, the bass is at the bottom occupying the lowest frequencies, and then things like splash cymbals or like heavenly synth sounds are way up high. Again, this is a contrast thing. In energetic parts of the song, like choruses, there is tons of bass, lots of high-end cymbals and stuff to sculpt this enormous tall mix. And then in the verses, it's like less energetic parts. There's not so much bass. There's not too many high sizzly sounds. Consider the sound of every instrument in the song. If they're all just as trebly and present and they all have the same amount of bass, your mix is gonna sound boring and flat. But then if you've got all these different levels happening throughout your mix and all the sounds occupy their own amount of space, then it's gonna sound huge. Think about the difference between the treble in this hi-hat compared to this kick drum over here, or like this vocal compared to the lead vocal. We've created contrast and it's gonna sound more exciting and more three-dimensional in the end. And again, we can be using the same tips we did earlier to create the depth and width of our mix. We're just using contrast here to create a bigger sound. Now that we've thought about the arrangement ahead of time, we have somewhat of a game plan or a blueprint to follow. The entire point of considering the arrangement early on is so that we can make decisions easier and get to where we need to be faster and achieve better results. Hopefully we won't be wasting time recording parts that we don't need or sourcing samples that we aren't going to use in the end project. A lot of what I've just said about arranging probably sounds to you like mixing things and how you approach a mix and how you would handle these certain things in the mix. But thinking about these things before we record them, before we find our samples, before we jump into that mix is going to help us get there so much faster, and we can build on it, we can expand on it. We can use the mixing process to enhance these sounds that we've already kind of got in place. When I jump into that mixing phase, I want things to sound cohesive already. I want it to sound like a song. I want there to be a vibe. I want there to be dynamics and energy. And I'm going to use this mixing phase of the process to enhance all of these things and just really dial them in to make them work together. Visualizing the arrangement early on and using it to make decisions throughout the production process is your secret weapon. Use it to your advantage and produce your next song like a boss. I'd really appreciate it if you left a comment before you go. What did you think of the way I visualize my arrangement process? Did it make sense to you? How do you arrange your songs? Let me know. Like this video if you found it helpful, and hit that subscribe button if you want to watch me talk to my camera about music more in the future. And that's it.